Okay, everyone, welcome. So my name is Jonathan Mitchell, and there I am. And I'm a clinical therapist at Open Sky. I work primarily with adolescent boys in Team A, and I've been with Open Sky for about 3.5 years. And I'm going to talk about boundaries today. This is something I'm actually pretty passionate about, and I want to frame the discussion today with a few points. One is holding boundaries is tough. And what I'm going to talk about today is a certain way of looking at boundaries, and it's a certain kind of paradigm. And I also want to say that it's not easy, primarily because the boundaries, and I'm going to work with the parent-child relationship here mostly, and it's not easy primarily because there is such a huge history between a parent and a child. And so a lot of what I'm going to say might seem simple or easy or overly simplified, or it's way more complex than this, Jonathan, and that's true, it is. And I'm really confident in my 12-year career or so working with young people and families. I found this way of doing it that I'm going to show you has been really successful, and it's something to come back to. The other point that I want to make is that a foundation of being successful in holding boundaries with someone relies upon each child or whoever has the boundaries held with them, their own efficacy. So the bottom line is that if they're not doing things well enough in their life, it's really hard to hold boundaries with them, as every one of you know that are attending this. So thanks for being here. So we'll start with the definition of a boundary. Etymologically, it's a line that marks the limits of an area. And the paradigm that I'm talking about is when a boundary becomes a verb or an action. And the key is, in order for a boundary to be effective, is that it has to be relational. So I'll look at this sweet family. So when I make boundaries a part of the relationship, rather than something that I'm demanding that a person does, or demanding something that someone follow, then it becomes potentially much more confrontational and difficult, because it becomes impersonal. Prison works in a non-relational way. The court systems work in a non-relational way, and they have to because of the way society is structured. But they're not that effective because ultimately people don't care who they're affecting. If I cross a boundary with someone and I know that I'm going to be hurting that person or inconveniencing that person in some way, then the boundary is more likely to be followed. If there's not a relationship, I'm not going to be as effective. How many of you have been a part of this scene? I mean, I have in my role here. And here's one key to this, is that if I see this happening, I immediately can stop what I'm doing and I go to what's going on right now. Part of becoming really effective at holding boundaries is about keeping the relationship alive within whatever is happening, within the process of the boundary. So it takes on higher stakes, and this is the piece that I was talking about around if someone, let's take an example of a child. If a child or a teenager pushes a boundary or breaks a boundary, it's like, it's important to have some kind of consequence there. That's one piece that I won't talk about a lot today, but it's really important to have a consequence available with a boundary that is paired with a boundary. But what's also incredibly important is that there's some kind of communication around how my child's breaking or pushing of the boundary affects me. There's such an efficacy that comes with being transparent. I'm actually really hurt. I feel really betrayed that you wouldn't come home when you said you would. And part of it is because I really worry about you, because I just care for you so much. So there's a stakes at work here. And as boundaries start to get broken and broken and broken again, and there's a pattern that occurs, it's important to keep the transparency there, while at the same time, and this is the other piece, so transparency is one piece. The other piece is welcoming the other person's transparency, welcoming my teenager's transparency, their vulnerability. What's going on for you? Why did you break it? And if you don't get to the root of the cause as to why they've broken or pushed on a boundary, then it might be because they don't feel safe getting vulnerable with you. It might be because if they really told you how they really felt, you would get offended, you would get triggered, you would get angry with them, and you wouldn't hear what they had to say. So that's a piece around this relationship, keeping it alive, keeping it vulnerable, keeping it transparent. And I'll also talk about what it looks like in the field. So the boundaries rooted in care. Here's Obama and Putin. Not necessarily caring relationship here, but I wanted to highlight the piece of what it is to take. It's about taking risks, not for the parent who's putting out the boundary, but for the child. And this is an interesting way to look at this. Is that if I'm the child, actually following a boundary is kind of a risk. It's often looked at it the other way around, that like breaking the boundary is the risk because there's a consequence that comes from that. But another way to look at it is that it's a risk for the child to follow the boundary. Because if they follow it, they're actually giving you power. And if they give you power, it means that, boy, my mom or dad better have my best interests in mind, or else I'm not going to do this anymore. And this can look at like a lot of different things with different boundaries, as benign as a time to come home at night, or even bigger, maybe staying sober. If I decide to relapse, am I aware of the impact that'll have on my parents? And if they're holding boundaries around me that are keeping me sober, do I really trust that they have my best interests in mind? If I do, the boundary is going to be a lot easier to follow. If I don't believe that they have my best interests in mind, then what's the point? Why should I follow it? I mean, yeah, I'll get punished, but I can get around the punishment. So a part of the foundation of this kind of scenario actually relies upon each person's self-efficacy. So if they do care about being sober for themselves, then it's going to be easier. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And I know a lot of you parents out there have not had that situation. Okay. So I see this so often with parents, especially, especially after their child has stabilized with us and they're at a place where they're open, they're committed, they're engaged to the process, they're looking at their own work, is that it often comes back to what is the parent's parenting style? Do they hold consequences or boundaries from a place that is more Machiavellian in terms of it's a punishment, it's detachment, they're just kind of have to sleep in the bed they made for themselves, that kind of piece, that end of the polarity? Or the other end around like parents wanting to be their child's friend and willing to bend over backwards to give everything they might need to turn their life around. So it's about finding the middle ground here around having some detachment around around the consequences that their child is going to have to deal with. Say if they skip school and fail a class, it's like, well, you failed a class, tough luck. I don't know how you're going to graduate with a 3.0. Oftentimes our kids are failing out of school completely. So again, it takes on a different form and a larger intervention has to take place, i.e. Open Sky. Or around the friendship, around getting down on literally on the child's level and saying like, what's going on? I don't know what to do. I'll be honest with you. Brad, I don't know what to do. It seems like you don't care. I don't know what to do with you anymore. Help me. Tell me what you think needs to happen. And again, oftentimes the students that come to Open Sky, the young adults or the teenagers come to Open Sky, they're like either not on the same page as what's best for them, or they don't care, or any kind of derivation of that. Great. So much of this work, again, comes from how I as a parent show up in relationship from my end. There's only so much I can do about the relationship, because ultimately a relationship are three entities. There's other, myself, and the relationship in between. So I can only control how I am in a relationship and what I'm putting into the relationship from my side. So one of the questions is, how do I as a parent break a relationship when I'm holding a boundary? Do I get triggered? Do I get angry? Do I feel powerless? Do I get meek? Do I get manipulative? And again, it could be said, well, I do all these things because my child's safety is at risk. And that's understandable. Part of this work in this webinar is to look at what comes up for me in relationship. So 2, what happens to me personally when I hold a boundary and it is broken? Am I offended? Do I take it personally? Is there some message from my own family of origin that comes up around I'm not good enough? I mean, there's literally infinite number of examples for this, but it's so important to look at what comes up when my child pushes back. So through looking at these pieces, I can be more effective in holding boundaries. I can be more strong and solid within myself. I can show up as someone who's mature and who is established in the parenting role, rather than maybe becoming a child in relationship with my child. And this is a piece that I see more often than not, is that when children raise the stakes on pushing boundaries and they put their own safety at risk, people's own family of origin stuff comes up. It could be as overt or intense as abuse that happened, verbal or physical, sometimes sexual. It could also be as benign as the loss of a parent. It could be as benign as, when my child yells at me, it reminds me of my father, and I get really small. It's so important to look at these pieces, because with my own awareness, as I can become more aware, I can then change whatever's happening in a dynamic. Awareness itself is curative. On a side note, that's a lot of what we work with in the field with your children. Okay, so if boundaries haven't worked, and this is the standard, it's not possible to do this every time in every interaction, but this is the standard that I always come back to personally when I'm working with your children, is I love you and I am in charge. Sometimes I've actually said these words. More often than not, I don't say them, but it's implicit in how I show up. And I'll also say this is way easier to do in a lot of ways for someone like me who doesn't have, like I spoke about at the beginning, the history with someone. They don't know my buttons. Even if they did know my buttons, it's okay, because I'm not with them all the time. We're not sharing a life together. So it's easier for me to do this, honestly. And actually, in a few minutes, I'm going to do a role play. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean and have my own style. So it's like, as much as I can, I'm showing up from this place of like, I love you, I care for you. That's why I'm doing this. And I'm actually holding this boundary. I'm saying this is the way it's going to be, because I'm in charge. It's not up to you. I welcome your input. I welcome what you have to say. But ultimately, as your parent, and this is a little bit different for young adults, but it can still be the same. I'm in charge. You are going to aftercare. If you don't want to go to aftercare after you turn 18, or if they're over 18 already, you can live on your own. I'm not going to financially support you in your endeavors if you're not going to aftercare, because I care that much about you. And then how is that for you to hear? Giving them a voice. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes. So if I make a boundary from a place in which I'm triggered, I'm not effective. There's not a relationship with the person. It's actually like, and this is the part, the piece that comes up around my own personal work. Excuse me one moment. If I'm holding a boundary and I'm responding to the person, and say I'm responding to them because what I don't realize is that my father spoke to me the same way that my son is speaking to me. I respond in the way that I would respond to my father. Let's say for me it's getting really quiet, kind of going away, shutting down. Then literally I'm going to put my hand in the way here. This is what's happening. I'm not talking to my son anymore. I'm talking to whatever in the way that I'm responding to. In this case, my knuckles. I'm responding to my father. So it's so important to do our own personal work and to bring awareness to that so that we have a greater freedom in terms of how we respond to people. I can use whatever's happening for me when it's appropriate, and I can become more transparent. It's not appropriate most of the time, especially when it's heated, to say, you're reminding me of my father right now. So making a distinction here. But it is appropriate to say, at a later time when it's not triggered, I had a really hard relationship with my father, and sometimes when you get angry, you remind me of that. But what I can say is, I'm shutting down right now. I don't know what to do with you. You're so angry and you're violent. You're punching holes in the walls. I'm not sure what to do with you right now. And I'm going to have to take some kind of greater action because you're out of control. So there's this transparency piece, and especially after maybe a crisis has ended, taking the time to be transparent, to say, I feel so worried for you. I'm so concerned. And I didn't make a note of this here, but as I share, it's also incredibly important to invite the other, my child, to share as well. And to set aside myself for a moment and to be completely with them. How is this for you? You seem like you're really struggling right now. What are you so angry about? Tell me what you're so angry about. I really want to know. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Okay, so what can I do to make this a place for you to tell me? Hopefully this is making sense to everybody. We'll have a time for everyone to share eventually. Okay, great. So I'm going to show you my own style of what this looks like, or can look like. And you should see on your screen now, this is Courtney. She actually works in the Open Sky office. And Courtney is putting on her thespian hat for a few minutes. And she's going to role play a child or an adolescent or young adult. And we can kind of get a feel for what my own style is. I also want to say that this is my own personal way of working with young people. And again, it's going to look really different because I don't really have a history. The history that we're going to be sharing is quite contrived. And I'm going to highlight some of the points that I talked about within all of this. I want to talk about, I'm going to do my best to show you what I mean around how it is to be, one, really strong, two, really sensitive to what the other person is going on, and three, to be transparent but also welcome their own transparency. And I don't know how this is going to go. This is totally improvised, just so you know. We had a brief chat just before we started and talked about a few things about how to show up. But I don't really know what's going to happen now, so I'm kind of putting myself in the hot seat here. I also am doing this because I want to give you a sense of how, and I think a lot of us in our clinical team will talk about working with your children, and a lot of us work in a similar way around keeping around how important the relationship is. On a quick side note, there's loads of research on how in a therapeutic relationship, which actually parenting is in a lot of ways, the relationship is the most important factor for change in that therapeutic relationship. So if I can keep the relationship alive, that is almost always my goal when I'm sitting with a client. And as a parent, that's something you can always come back to, is how is the relationship? And again, I will come back to at some point and talk about how you can do this in the field with your child now. But I wanted to keep it more generalized at the beginning. So Courtney, we're gonna be in the field right now, and we'll just see how it goes. So Courtney, how's it going for you? What's going on? Oh no, I can't hear you. Virginia, I think you need to come in here. I'll pause just for a second. We're having technical difficulties. No. Oh, I can't hear you. No. This is the first time we've done this, so. Oh. Oh, you're just coming in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna try to, maybe we'll kind of put our acting thing on and we can kind
Yeah.
of face the screen as well.
Cool.
Okay. Cool. So what's going on?
Nothing new.
Okay. Are you feeling happy, upset?
Feeling awesome.
Really?
Totally.
You seem to be kind of sarcastic.
Me sarcastic. No, really, it's totally fine.
Nice. I don't believe you.
Why?
Because I'm just going to tell you you're being sarcastic. I know I usually don't do that in this thing around like telling you how you're feeling or how you're being, but you're definitely being sarcastic.
Okay, I'm being sarcastic.
Cool. All right, we got that established. So are you upset about something?
I'm starving.
Okay.
Been eating the same thing for like 5 weeks now,
Okay. Cool.
and I'm just not gonna eat anymore.
You're not gonna eat at all,
Nope.
just because you don't like the food?
No, it's how many times? It's boring, and it's like, why bother?
Huh. Okay.
It's the same thing every time. I don't get any choice in it. They just tell me what to eat, and I have to eat it. I have to carry it. I have to
Okay.
share it.
Okay. Interesting. I don't know how that's gonna serve you. It's gonna be pretty uncomfortable, I think.
Well, maybe it'll give me different food. They're not gonna let me starve to death. I mean,
Oh,
they
okay.
spend a lot of money for me to be here, my parents, so, they're not gonna let me starve. That wouldn't go well for the company.
That's true. That's true. That would not go well with the company. Okay. Cool. Well, you're right. We're not going to let you starve. And I'm also not going to give you any different food.
So I am gonna starve.
Well, so this is the thing we have to work out here is you're not going to starve, but maybe we'll just see what. Have you ever not eaten for longer than a day?
I don't know.
I'm guessing not. It's not something that people do unless you're fasting.
Hmm.
You ever fasted before?
No.
Okay. Well, one is I don't think you're gonna last very long. That's not a challenge. I'm just saying it's pretty hard to do. Like I've tried to do it at some points in my life, and I haven't been very successful at it.
Well, people do all the time, like, I don't know, like Gandhi.
That's true. You're just like Gandhi. Just kidding. I'm sorry. That was kind of mean. You're not just like Gandhi. But here's the piece. Here's the deal. You are welcome to choose not to eat, for sure. And I'm kind of curious more about, before we go there, how come you don't want to eat?
I don't know, I just don't want to have the same thing all the time. It's my choice not to eat. I want
Okay.
a choice in something.
Okay, that's cool. I bet there are other things you can have choice in.
Like, I mean, everyone tells me when I can go to the bathroom, when we are hiking, when I can sleep, when I have to get up,
Yeah, that's true.
who I have to
That's
talk
true.
to, I have to talk about my feelings, when I have to be
So,
quiet.
okay, right on. So you're feeling kind of out of control, is what it sounds like, huh?
I guess. I mean, I have no control here.
Got it. Okay. All right, cool. So what do you need? What do you think you need in all this? Besides different food, because you're not going to get different food. I'll just tell you that.
I want different food.
Well, you're not going to get it. It sucks, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really sucks.
You get to go, you're here for like, what, a day? And then you go
Yeah.
home and you get to eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
So
I
cheesy
do.
torts are fun for you, they're not fun for me.
Well, I don't think they're very fun.
Over it.
No. I mean, they taste okay, but I don't think they're that great. You're right. I do get to go home and eat whatever I want, pretty much. And that really sucks for you,
Yeah.
honestly. It really sucks. And it's not going to change. So how can we work this out?
Well, you said I can't have different food, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about this. And I don't know if this is really going to help you or not. Because I want to somehow... I'm willing to kind of meet you someplace around this. I don't really know what we can do. I mean, you're not going to get different food again. But what I will say is that if you refuse to eat for a while... Are you going to drink water? How's the water?
I mean, I would like something other than water, but
Okay.
it's water. I mean, it's fine, I guess.
Okay, right on. So you're drinking water?
Yeah.
Sweet. That sounds good. Good work. What I
Yeah,
was.
good work. Water.
Wow. Okay. Well, what's it? How are things between us?
I don't know. I mean,
What do you think of me?
I don't know. You're here once. I don't even know you. You don't know me. You're here like 1 day, 2 days,
Yeah.
whatever.
That's true.
So, I mean, I guess we're fine.
Yeah. Is there something that you? Tell me more about what you think about. Just tell me what you think about me. I'm actually really curious.
About you?
Mm-hmm. And you can't really offend me. I'm pretty sure. I mean, you might be able to, but it's okay if you did.
I don't know. I mean, you like come in here and expect me to just spill my guts to you, and I'm living in the middle of nowhere and with other girls who are totally crazier than me. And I don't have a choice in being here. I don't get to eat what I want. I get to see who I want. I have to deal with really obnoxious guides. I have to, I don't get to talk to any of my friends. Like, I see you. I mean, I guess you're better than that guide.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But
Well, let me say one thing. I don't expect you to spill your guts to me. Like, you don't have to. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
I tried talking about food. Didn't work.
No, this is great. I'm glad we're talking about this. This is really important for you, right?
Yeah,
Food is a really big deal, and you hate the food here,
I do.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hate.
Totally hate it.
Yes. It sucks.
I didn't like it at first, and now I really don't like it.
Oh, God, it's just gotten worse, huh?
Yeah.
Brutal. Well, I'm sorry that we can't give you more different food. Nothing's going to change around that. It's a bummer.
Shocking.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of how it works around here. And so nothing much is going to change for you, I don't think, until you start eating the food. Like you're still on gateway, Like you're still in the very beginning part of the program because you haven't eaten a full meal yet, and you haven't really started your work here, which sucks.
But like, I don't want. What do I have to work?
Well,
Like, my parents sent me here because they don't want to deal with me.
really, that's what you think?
Yeah. I mean, hello. They sent me into the middle of the woods. Could at least send me to like a spa or something with a therapist.
Yeah.
I had to eat crappy food and sit in the woods, get dirty. I
Yeah.
can't even wash my hair.
So, like, the fact that you were, like, skipping school every day and, like, doing drugs with your friends and not coming home at night and you had ran away and...
I mean, they don't care anyway.
Really?
Really. Like,
Oh, wow.
whatever. I don't come home. I'm fine.
Wow. Well, I'm going to tell you this. This might offend you. I'm sorry if it does. But you're not fine.
And
this is
how
gonna,
do you know?
This is going to sound kind of harsh, but your life is kind of a fucking mess.
Wow.
Yeah.
Says the person who sees me once or twice a
I
week.
know. And here's the deal. I don't have to know you very well to know that your life's a mess. And this might be really hard to hear, and I'm sorry, I just interrupted you. I'm sorry about that, but I want you to hear this because it's something you're going to hear a lot here, and I just want to let you know. When people are like skipping school, doing pretty significant drugs, hanging out with people, I mean, they're your friends, they get it, but there's probably some stuff you're getting into that you probably didn't even really like. I mean, there's stuff's not right in your life. And so, like, when did things start to get bad with your parents?
I don't know. Telling me what to do all the time. I
Hmm.
mean, I guess they always did that.
Huh.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't see them very often.
Oh, okay. How often do you see them?
I don't know. Dad's always working, and Mom, like my other brothers and sisters, are always going all these places. So
Oh,
I just
wow.
like hang out. So
Brutal.
I got other things to do.
Yeah,
myself.
right. Do you remember ever really, like, enjoying them? Enjoying being around them?
My
Liking being around them?
parents?
Yeah. I know, weird, huh?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess when I was really little.
Really? What was
Yeah.
that like?
I don't know, I just like goof around and it wasn't so serious all the time, and they weren't
Huh.
always asking me what I was doing with my life and
Huh.
why I was, they weren't telling me what to do all the time, like questioning me. They were just like, I don't know, they liked me.
Right on. So now you don't feel like that they like you.
Mm-mm. I mean, they never say anything nice to me.
Wow.
So always telling me what to do, so why would I want to hang out with them if I can go
Wow.
hang out with people who like me?
Wow. Huh. Well, let me say something to you. One, I bet that there's some things your parents could do to make you feel like they actually liked you and cared for you, so Mary. But two, I bet that things were such a crisis in your life, and you were doing so many things to piss them off. And
Why are you pissing me off?
well, okay, fair enough. I bet that they were. And I mean, think about all the things that you were doing just to kind of get back at them. You know, like you're telling them to fuck off. You're telling them that they're, expletive.
Well, I didn't listen.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe they need to work on listening. What I want you to start to look at this week is just how things that you were doing to kind of stir them up a bit. And it might make sense in part why they would act that way. Are you willing just to look at that maybe just a little bit? I know your parents have their work. They do.
I mean, I guess there's nothing else to do here.
Okay, right on. Okay. Awesome.
Yay!
Yay! Good job.
Thanks.
All right, Courtney, get back to the group.
Yay!
Thanks, Courtney. You were good.
Thanks. Sister.
Courtney's got teenage sisters, so she was really well prepared to do that role. Great. Okay, so I want to talk about a few things that I tried my best to do, and sometimes I'm not always successful when I'm working with students. And you saw this a little bit. Part of it was like acknowledging like what they're going through. That the food here really does suck, and that it must be really hard for them to eat the food day in, day out. And it was kind of subtle at first, but I was like, yeah, we're not going to change your food, it's like not even an issue. Like we're not even going to talk about it. But so it's just kind of like, not putting that boundary, making the boundary, but not making it about the boundary. This is a point that I really want to underscore, is that when you're making a boundary, try, and I try to do this myself, not to make the conversation in the relationship about the boundary. It's like holding a boundary, but not making it about the boundary. So I did that in the way of just like, yeah, the food's not going to change, but what, really quick, I changed it to like, well, what can we do around this? What, and if I did, you can tell I didn't really get very far with like, well, I'm not going to change the diet for her. But I tried to go to like something deeper, and this is a place that's important to go to. And there's also this line around like not being a therapist for your child, but being therapeutic. So the difference for me is in what I did right there was, I'm not going to change the diet, but what else is going on? Because there's something driving her refusal to eat, right? The food, can suck for some people here, but there's also other stuff going on. And if other things were going really well, she would be willing to make a sacrifice for herself. And this is a huge piece about being in Open Sky or being outside of Open Sky, is that children are willing to make sacrifices if they trust that it's about the relationship and that they're being heard, that they're being loved, the best interest piece. So that's a huge piece. What else did I do there? So part of it was like I was holding the boundary around your life is a mess. I wanted to be really clear, and I was not going to entertain her idea of like I do what I want to do. What was driving her all those behaviors? One was she didn't feel like her parents liked her. And this is interesting in my experience in working with families, is that not all, but a lot of situations when kids get out of control start from a break in relationship early on. Before anything crazy happens or any crisis occurs, there's often a break in the relationship where the child's needs are not getting met in one way or another. Not always, but a lot of times. So again, coming back to this touchstone of like, how is the relationship? Before crazy things start to happen, how is the relationship? What else? I tried to be pretty transparent. I did my best to share a bit. I didn't share too much of what was going on for me personally, but I did my best to encourage her own vulnerability. This sucks for you. Yeah, it does. You start to kind of light up a little bit. Kind of like, in that moment, I had the relationship. It was alive. She trusted me enough to be like, and there was something that went on inside of her, and I can say this with confidence, even not checking in with Courtney, is that she was like, she felt heard in that moment, and just through like feeling really heard, she was able to kind of be herself a bit, And we want our children to be themselves. And in that moment of her being heard, I bet she would even be willing to make some kind of a sacrifice. And you saw it at the very end. It's like, are you willing to take a look at this stuff, knowing that, like, yes, your parents have their work? Are you willing to take a look at this stuff this week and just work with it a little? She was just kind of like, yeah, I guess. And honestly, this is the point I haven't made yet, but this is honestly how a lot of my sessions go in the field, is just like this, especially in the beginning when students just arrive. It's like they come in, like, who is this guy? He's here for like a day or 2 days a week. He doesn't even backpack with us. He gets to eat his own food. Who's he telling me what to do? And so walking into that projection, that idea of what everyone has of me, I have to actually kind of go to that place of like, this sucks for you. Like, how can I, And again, I said, you don't have to pour your guts to me. Giving them freedom to do whatever they want. Another point, I want my children to be free to do whatever they want within the boundaries that I create as their parent. So it's about like naming the container or naming the boundaries of their life. And I'm keeping this really generalized on purpose. Keeping it, naming the boundary, defining what the boundaries are. But within that, like, man, what kind of freedom do you have here? What do you want to do? How can I support you in this? And maybe with some of your questions, we can get more specific, and I can talk about just my own perspective on things. Okay, so some things that you all can do in the field. In your letters, go for it. I think with all the parents that we as clinicians, as a therapist, work with, parents are walking on eggshells, and it makes sense to me why you all are doing that because of the crises that were happening before Open Sky. But I'm just here to tell you, like, we got them. They're okay. Your kids they're doing great, and whatever they do, we can manage. If they start hurting themselves, if they get really angry, if they, don't want to be here, it's like we have the resources to contain them and to support them. So in your letters, take risks, and practice doing two things in every letter. One, really working on acknowledging or validating feelings that your kids are having in their letters. If you get the letters home of like, this place sucks, it's like torture, it's like prison, I don't want to be here. I promise, and how many of you have heard this, I promise if you take me home, I'll go to therapy, I'll do whatever you want, And so, like, how I would encourage you all to respond to letters like that, and really any letter, is to look for the feeling that is driving the message. So, for example, it sounds like you really don't want to be there. It sounds like it's really uncomfortable there for you. I mean, it sounds like you hate it, actually. Jennifer, it sounds like you hate it. And this is another subtlety, eliminate but from your vocabulary when you're writing letters. I mean, that's a bit much, but work on using and. It sounds like you hate it there, and you're going to stay there until we decide that you're ready to leave. And I know that might make you angry or sad, and that's okay with me. Because here's why you need to be here. And you can talk about the impact letter, go into the impact letter. So it's like, and maybe you saw me do this in the role play, acknowledging her feeling, what was going on for her. It sounds like it sucks for you out here. And then delivering a boundary or a message. We're not going to change the food. And I usually do it in that order, validating first, it sounds like it sucks here, to, I'm not going to change the food. But, and then here's the but. So how is it, what can we do? What freedom can you have here? Let's talk about more things. We're not going to talk about the food stuff anymore because it's not going to change. I'll just tell you that. Cool. And we'll have a chance to get into questions here in just a few minutes. And Noel, I see you have a question here, and I'll get to that. That's great. Thank you. So what does it look like, this exploration? So talk about with your therapist on the calls. A lot of the calls are devoted to what's going on with your child in the field and what's happening there. But I encourage you to really investigate for yourself. Like, what happens for you when you attempt to hold a boundary with them? What's happened historically? And how does that history, whether it's in your own family of origin or just in the more recent history, contemporarily, what has happened with your child such that you're not being the way that you would like to be? When I struggle holding boundaries, family of origin. So again, we break the relationship in the moment. We talked about a few examples. So here's a piece. People respond to boundaries, and I've seen this in parent-child relationships. I've seen this in my own relationships with kids. When they know they're loved and cared for, when they know that their best interests are in mind. It helps a lot when they are on board with what their best interests are. 2, I like this photo. So they trust those who have power over them. Not like this. I've done this figuratively with kids before. It doesn't really work, you know? It's just like forcing it. And sometimes I feel like I have to. You as parents feel like you have to keep them safe, to really hold a firm boundary. But it doesn't really work. Here's the piece. It's about taking risks. They have to trust us as caregivers. This is Bill Murray skydiving. Love Bill Murray. So they have to trust who has power over them. Another point, I have the most influence or power over someone when I'm in a relationship with them. People are willing to do way more when when I have a good, solid relationship with them. You know, when I am transparent, when I'm vulnerable, when I'm not coming from that Machiavellian place. It's important to know, like I said earlier, that when students follow a boundary, it's taking a risk. 3, they've experienced enough growth, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, they've experienced enough growth within themselves to respect boundaries. This is Jackie Robinson. That they know and you know that there's congruence in what you want as parents and what they want as kids. I imagine that almost everyone on this webinar right now or viewing this webinar is at the point where the kids, your children's goals, their children's values were not in congruence with your own. And this is a huge piece. So, you know, with your children being here, a lot of what we're doing here is getting your children to realize what their goals could be in a way where they're not fighting you, they're not being passive aggressive, they're getting back on track. So, I'll try to summarize as much as I can here. Take risks with your children. Maybe the risk is being really strong. Maybe the risk is being really sensitive. There's a gender division here, honestly. We'd love for it to shift in our society, but honestly, it's taking a long time. I see males and fathers being overly strict and not vulnerable enough, and I see mothers a lot of time being sensitive and not standing in their power as much as they could. Play with your roles there. If you're someone who is typically very strong and has a really hard time being sensitive, man, devote a weekly letter to just being totally vulnerable and open and sensitive. And don't put any boundaries out there. Similarly, I just had a student who's going through the graduation process right now. Father wrote a letter and just shared like how much he feels like he's to blame for all this. How if he would have done things really differently in this child's life, maybe they wouldn't get to the situation that they were here at Open Sky. Really just kind of bearing his soul. And it was so impactful. Here's a quick tangent, is that the more that you all as parents take risks with your children, even as through very subtle ways in the letter writing, which, by the way, kids is a major, major deal, as much of a deal as it is for you all as parents, seeing those letters posted. The more that you take risks and show that you're growing, both subconsciously and consciously, your kids do the same thing. They mirror what you all do. There's a great book about this called The Parallel Process you all can check out. It's a beautiful book. And we'll support you in finding a new way to be with your family, in a way that's authentic, in a way that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of efforting. Old patterns can be there, but there's a way. Relationship is about being. Wonderful. So would love to open it up to questions. And the way that this is usually most effective is that when you all write questions, if you can generalize them a bit, it's more helpful for me, because oftentimes if the question is really specific, which it can be specific and just go for it, the answer also starts with "it depends." So we just want to open it up to everyone on the call, and would love to hear your remarks or your questions, any comments, anything. I'd really love to hear from you. So we'll start with Noel. So let's see, I'll read this question. I find it very hard to hold the boundaries when I'm not angry. My daughter is 20 and doesn't want to go to aftercare. She feels she's better. How can I be strong enough when it doesn't feel natural to tell her she doesn't have an option to come home? I'm afraid she will go off on her own and it won't be safe for her. So this is a great, thank you, Noel. This is a great question, a great point. It makes sense to me that it doesn't feel natural to you. This is what growth is, really. And this is what I'm talking about when I say taking risks, is that we have to do things that don't feel natural to us. That's how we grow. That's what's actually happening for your daughter in the field, in Team D. We're really pushing her to do things that aren't natural. So, and this is also really tricky ground around this aftercare piece with young adults. What I typically say to parents, and it depends on how to work with this on a case-by-case basis, but I'll say what I usually say in general, and I would not say do this, because I don't know your situation and the nuances of what's happening in the relationship and with Holly, is that especially with young adults, there's this point of holding a boundary and then letting them do whatever they're going to do because they're adults. And sometimes that might mean them taking risks that are not safe, that may even put her life in jeopardy. And this is a tough call. I mean, probably one of the toughest calls I've seen parents make is am I willing to stand behind this boundary enough, knowing that my child may really hurt herself? And there's a point, though, that this is her own life. So, am I willing to let her do that, or am I not? And I'm not saying there's a good or a bad or a right or a wrong here. But one option that you have is to say, and like I said this earlier, we as your parents will not financially support you if you choose to not go to aftercare. And you will not live in this home. And that is a boundary I'm going to hold, because I believe so strongly that this is what's best for you. And there's a point right there within the boundary of letting go. You can do this with most boundaries, with most ultimatums that I make. Of like, this is the boundary, now I'm going to let go and see what they do. And this is the perfect situation for that. Very difficult, super tough thing to do. And again, it's up to you and what you really choose to do, Noel. But that's one option, is holding that boundary, putting it out there and say, and you can do whatever you want, but just know that this is the way it's going to be. And it's not about it feeling comfortable. And that's what we're here for as therapists, is to support you in that boundary, both personally and anything you might need, but also in the field and holding that boundary. Our children, really will get support. Your kids will get support from the group, from the guides out there. They'll bring that situation to the group, and a lot of people, oftentimes the young adult groups, almost always, I would say, the group as a whole is just like, I wouldn't do it. Continue your work, because they have seen, this other person transform. So most of the time, I see a lot of shift happen around that piece, around like, well, I'm not going to go. I'm going to walk. You can't tell me what to do. And at some point, there's like, okay, well, good luck. Great. I hope that answered your question, Noel. Any other questions out there or comments? Anything goes. So Noel, I'll just read your comment here. Thank you. I will hold the boundary because it's best for Holly. Thank you for your time tonight. Much appreciated. You're welcome. And good luck with that. Great. Let's post this question. KB from New York. How can you really tell the difference between your child manipulating versus just trying to open up to you and being vulnerable? Wow, really good question. What's implicit in your question is that you don't trust your child. And what I often do, both with teenagers and young people that I've been working with for a very long time in private practice, or with students that is more short-term in the field for like 2 months, is I'll just say, I'm having a really time trusting what you're saying to me. And I may even actually say, like, I can't tell if you're manipulating me or if you're actually being vulnerable. Man, naming what is happening, or what my perception of what is happening in the relationship, can go so far. What is great and was really helpful, because this is a kind of a confrontation, if I were to say that to a child, it's a confrontation. That's an important piece. Is my own desire of I really want to believe that you're being vulnerable, but honestly, like, it's hard for me to trust you. I'm just not sure. And then like welcoming, like, what do you think? Like, tell me. Tell me what you think about that. This is tough for me. Like, I really want to believe that what you're saying is really true, but man, it's super tough for me right now. I feel like you're kind of manipulating me a bit. And that's just a way to start a conversation. It'll get the conversation going. If a conversation is stuck, if you're stuck with your child, I encourage all of you to name what's happening, or name what's happening for you, with an openness to it shifting, and an openness to a genuineness. Man, I'd love to believe you're being 100% genuine and honest with me, but I just don't know. Tell me what's going on for you. So I hope that answered your question, KB. Great. And let me know, please post again if there's a follow-up question or more dialogue that we can have around this. Thanks. Great. So, Anne. Oh, good. Thanks, KB. Anne asks from Louisville, what if parents miss the boat and don't set a boundary until after the fact? And 1 second here. What if parents miss the boat and don't set a boundary until after the fact? How can we establish a boundary after it already has been crossed? Well, you can, if you can give me an example, it'll be, I don't know, I'm kind of going back on what I said earlier, but if you can give me an example, I think it might be more helpful. One is you just establish the boundary, and you acknowledge, and maybe you can say why you let it happen in the beginning, and why you want to start the boundary now. I think that'd be helpful to help address the question. And maybe it is better for your questions to be more specific, actually. So one is, I would say, make the boundary, and then 2, it's about maybe even acknowledging what you're doing. I'll try to think of an example. I know I told you like last week that you could stay out until midnight this week, and I'm going to actually ask that you come home at 10 this weekend instead. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Why would you do that? You can't go back on your word. And you're probably wanting to hold the boundary because something changes in the relationship and there's a lack of trust, is what I would imagine. That's what I know for me, even in working with people, I will go back on my word. Okay, good. Thanks, Ann. I'm answering your question. I will go back on my word, but it's usually almost always because the other person has done something to influence my decision. Let me see if I can think of an example from the field. Well, I'll go back to my example around coming home on time. I said midnight before because, I thought things were going really good and I'd really trusted you. And then, this week your grades, you failed 3 tests and you had a relapse. I mean, that's why you're coming. That's why I want you to come home early, because I don't really trust you. I don't trust that that you're on the right track right now. And it's hard for me to think of an example of when I would go back on my boundary, revoke my own commitment, based on something I thought. If I'm revoking my commitment, and this is what I've seen and know for myself, 9 times out of 10, it's about my own fear, my own lack of trust, and I can actually name, again, in the relationship, say it's with my son. Jeffrey, I'm feeling pretty scared actually about this weekend coming, and I know I told you you could stay out till midnight. If you want to stay up till midnight, great. I did commit to that, but I'll tell you that I'm actually pretty freaked out. I'm pretty scared that something's going to happen this weekend. And I kept my word, and I'm just going to trust you that you'll make the right decisions this weekend. I just want you to know that. Man, that kind of stuff goes so far in the relationship. Because then Jeffrey goes out in the weekend, and he knows that, like, if he say he relapses or he takes drugs or does something that we'd agreed upon that he wouldn't do, he knows and he can feel, not just the distinction here, knows and feels how that's going to affect me as his father. Really, take the higher stakes piece that we talked about earlier. Great. Any other questions? We've got a couple more minutes here. Oh, there's a lot of you out there. I don't see a lot of questions. I'm kind of saying some provocative stuff here. I'm kind of surprised you guys aren't saying more. Great. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then we will start to wrap up here. Virginia, am I missing anything? Just want to make sure that there aren't questions being posted that I just can't see. Great. Oh, okay. Here's a couple more. Oh, wow. Here come all your questions. Awesome. Great. We'll start with Jeffrey from California. Asks, once a boundary is crossed, how do you set consequences? Well, ideally, you have set a boundary and the person will have known about the consequences before they cross the boundary. That's a part that I didn't talk about too much tonight, but one of the things that you can do as a parent to really work on the efficacy of boundaries is that you have very clear rules in your household and very clear consequences of what happens if those rules are crossed or those rules are not followed. It's way harder to, as I think your question implies, it's way harder to set consequences after a boundary has been crossed. In that case, you kind of just do the best that you can. And again, I would even say in that example, if I were parenting, a child, and I use my son Jeffrey here as an example, I realized that I didn't set this up beforehand, and so I'm going to be a little bit lenient with the consequences here because I really want, the rules to be clear, and that if you do something, that I want you to know kind of like what the consequence is for it. So this is what I'm going to say for you right now. What do you think about that? Make it a dialogue as much as you can and be as transparent as possible. Thanks, Jeffrey. Karen, does what you mentioned really apply universally? In my experience, yes. What it actually looks like is really different. It depends what the relationship is. If this is a company, I've applied all of these things to my working relationships, to being a supervisor. Anytime there's a power dynamic involved, I use this kind of paradigm that I'm talking about. So in my experience, it really does. All right. Ooh, I'm going over a couple minutes here, so I'll take one more question. How do you battle the feeling that you have to justify your boundaries? This is a great question, CS. Um, that feeling that I have to justify my boundaries is all about me. That's my personal work. And that becomes about my own work, and the more that I can keep that out of the relationship with my kids, the more clean my boundary setting will be, the more effective I'll actually be. If I feel like I have to justify my boundaries, it's probably because I have something around boundaries being pushed in my own history. Something comes up for me there, some kind of feeling. So it's really appropriate for me to work on that on the side. The distinction is that it might be appropriate for me to bring that into the relationship with my child, and the fact that I might say, this is really hard for me. I feel like I have to justify what I'm saying to you, and I don't want to do that. So again, it's coming back to that relational piece. Great. Thank you all so much for being here or for looking at this webinar. And after I end here in a moment, you'll be directed to a short survey. Oh, and this is a note too. I remember this, Virginia, is that this webinar I came up with about a week ago. It was actually from an idea that parents request that parents had from their feedback from taking this survey. So if you're willing and if you have the time, take a few minutes and fill out this survey, because your input is really welcome, and we will customize these webinars to what your feedback is. So thank you all so much for being here. It was a pleasure being with you, and have a wonderful evening.